I'm a 32-year-old man, and I've learned the hard way that just because someone smiles at you doesn't mean they're on your side. I grew up in a family that cared more about how things looked than how people felt. My mother especially made everything about presentation. She was one of those women who always had a perfect holiday card, always threw the most polished dinner parties, and always said the right thing in front of the right people. But behind closed doors, she was controlling in ways that didn't always seem obvious, until you were the one being controlled. When I met Laurel, I knew from early on she wasn't like the women my family expected me to date. Laurel's from a modest working-class background. Her parents don't wear designer clothes or play country club golf, but they're kind, honest, and tight-knit. She's calm in a way that makes you listen, but she doesn't back down easily. My family never said anything outright when I introduced her. No dramatic outbursts or cruel remarks. It was worse than that. It was the kind of polite disapproval that hides behind a smile. From the beginning, I noticed small things. Laurel was never added to the group chat. Family photos were taken and posted without her, even when she was in the room. My mother made little comments about how Laurel must find it overwhelming to be around such a successful family, or how different her upbringing must have been. I called it out once, and my mother immediately turned into a victim. She said Laurel misunderstood her, that she was just trying to be welcoming, that she had always supported my choices. I warned Laurel. I told her my family had a habit of testing people, especially anyone they felt wasn't a natural fit. She said she'd noticed things too, but didn't want to create friction. She kept it respectful, polite, and distant. She showed up when invited, but never tried to force herself into the family dynamic. She could sense that something was always being judged. When I proposed, I made the mistake of telling my family before we told anyone else. My mother insisted on throwing us an engagement dinner. She went overboard, hired a decorator, booked a venue, picked the color scheme. At the event, she barely let Laurel breathe between compliments. The whole thing felt like a performance. My father, who's usually reserved, was suddenly chatty with Laurel. My sister kept asking Laurel to take selfies together. It didn't feel genuine. It felt like everyone had rehearsed a role. Later that night, Laurel told me she had a knot in her stomach the whole evening. It didn't feel like they were happy for us. It felt like they were watching her, like she was on trial. A few days later, I found out my mother had reached out to Laurel's ex-boyfriend. She'd pretended to be from a research firm doing a background check. She asked him things about Laurel's old jobs, her dating history, and her mental health. He called Laurel afterward to ask if everything was okay, and that's how we found out. I confronted my mother. She didn't deny it. She said she was just being thorough before fully embracing Laurel into the family. She said she needed to be sure Laurel's intentions were pure. I told her this wasn't her decision to make, and that she'd crossed a line. She claimed she was protecting me, but there was nothing to protect me from. Laurel had never done anything to deserve suspicion. We scaled back the wedding, we invited only close friends, and a few relatives we trusted. My mother sulked. My aunt sent passive-aggressive messages about family unity. We had our ceremony in a small garden venue outside the city, and didn't give my mother any role in it. She still showed up wearing white, but Laurel didn't flinch. We had already decided we wouldn't let them ruin the day. For a few weeks after the wedding, things seemed to calm down. My mother sent us a gift basket and a letter that sounded like an apology. My sister reached out to invite us to lunch. We thought maybe they were moving on, but then small things started happening. Laurel would find odd items on our porch, baby clothes, a box of cleaning supplies with notes about keeping a proper home, religious pamphlets with verses highlighted. At first, we thought maybe a neighbor had dropped them by mistake. But then one afternoon, Laurel noticed our guest bedroom had been rearranged. The bedspread had been replaced with a new one, white and frilly. Some of the wall decor had changed. No signs of forced entry, just subtle changes that someone had made on purpose. I changed the locks. I told my mother she wasn't allowed to come over unannounced. She cried. She told everyone I was pulling away, that Laurel had turned me against her. My father said I was overreacting. He didn't defend what she did, but admitted he hadn't known the full extent of it until now. Then, Laurel's favorite coffee mug cracked in the cabinet. Her face cream looked slightly off in color. Nothing we could prove, but enough to make us uneasy. We started logging everything. Times, dates, photos. I didn't tell my mother, but I knew this wasn't over. The wedding wasn't the finish line for her. It was just the start of something worse. I could feel it building, and I wasn't going to wait around for the next surprise. About a week after the wedding, Laurel told me something strange. She had found a bundle left on our porch. Inside was a pair of baby socks, a religious pamphlet with sections underlined in red pen, and a bottle of floor cleaner. Tucked into the sock was a small note written in my mother's handwriting. It read, "One day you'll understand." There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I checked the porch camera. It hadn't been installed to catch anything serious, just a basic motion sensor setup. But the footage was blurry. A short woman in a sun hat approached, placed the bag down and left quickly. She never looked up. I didn't say much to Laurel that night. I changed the lock codes the next morning and added a deadbolt to the back door. A few days later, Laurel came home from running errands and noticed something off. Our guest bedroom had been rearranged. The comforter was new, floral, bright, not ours. A ceramic angel statue sat on the windowsill. One of Laurel's framed photos had been replaced with a cross-stitched quote about obedience and family. We checked the doors. No signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen, just changed. Quietly. and deliberately. I called a locksmith and had every single lock replaced, including the garage and the storage room in the backyard. Then I messaged my mother. I didn't accuse her. I didn't scream. I told her clearly and directly that she was not allowed to come to our house without a specific invitation. I told her the locks had been changed. I told her this wasn't a negotiation. That weekend, we attended a family lunch at a relative's house. I went mostly because my younger cousin had asked me directly to show up. I figured we could be civil. My mother was already seated when we arrived. Within 15 minutes, she stood up and, loud enough for the entire table, began accusing Laurel of isolating me from the family, of brainwashing me, of turning me into someone I wasn't. She started crying. Not quiet crying, public sobbing. People froze. My father asked if we could talk outside. I followed him out. I explained everything. The uninvited visits, the rearranged guest room, the items left on our porch. He didn't argue. He just rubbed his face and said it was best not to escalate things. I asked him if he thought breaking into someone's house was normal. He didn't answer. A few days later, Laurel's mother came to visit. She had never been openly critical of my family, but she noticed the tension right away. That night, we all sat down to dinner. My mother had been invited only because I thought maybe she'd behave with another adult present. She didn't. Within 10 minutes, she was asking Laurel's mother questions about Laurel's childhood friends, why Laurel transferred schools in high school, if she had any old habits they should know about. She asked if Laurel ever saw a counselor growing up. Laurel's mother didn't flinch. She calmly said that the conversation was not appropriate and asked if this was why she'd really been invited. I didn't wait this time. I sent a message to every family member who had ever dropped by our home. I told them uninvited visits were no longer welcome. If they wanted to stop by, they needed to ask first. I wasn't rude, but I was direct. My mother responded with a long, dramatic message. She said I was cutting ties, that Laurel had won, and that she hoped I'd come back one day. Then she removed herself from the family group chat. For a few days, everything was quiet. Then Laurel hosted a small brunch at our place for 3 of her friends. After they left, she noticed her favorite mug was cracked right down the handle. It hadn't been like that morning. Her skincare bottles, 3 of them, had the caps unscrewed. Just enough that product had started leaking into the drawers. We checked the security system. No alerts, no open windows. It didn't sit right. The back entry sensor had a glitch that day. That night, I installed small cameras inside the living room, hallway, and guest room. They were discreet. I didn't want to turn our house into a fortress. I just wanted to know for sure. 4 days later, another item appeared on our porch. This time it was a hardcover parenting book. Wrapped in ribbon, inside the front cover was a sticky note. You'll need this sooner than you think. Love always. The handwriting was more rushed this time, like someone nervous about being caught. Laurel didn't react much. She picked it up, flipped through the pages, and put it in a bag. She didn't speak about it, just shook her head once and walked to the kitchen. I didn't ask her to explain. I understood. This wasn't about forgiveness or misunderstandings anymore. This was about someone who didn't like losing control and had decided to make it a game. But I had started keeping score. The footage didn't leave room for questions. Laurel sat beside me while we played it back. My mother walked up to our door in the early morning, used a key, and stepped inside like she owned the place. She wasn't hurried. She didn't check if anyone was home. She walked straight to the guest room, opened the vanity drawer, and swapped out a bottle of face serum with an identical one she took from her coat pocket. Then, she calmly turned and left. 6 minutes. That was all it took. I had already changed the locks once, but clearly that wasn't enough. I called a different locksmith this time, replaced every lock, front, back, garage, even the shed, and asked for tamper alerts to be activated. I added new sensors to all doors and windows, and got rid of every old key that might still be out there. Then, I wrote a letter. No emotions, no invitations to explain. I informed her that she was no longer allowed on our property under any circumstance, that it was not a debate, that all future attempts would be handled through legal channels. That same afternoon, we filed a report at the police station. We didn't press charges. I just wanted it on record. The officer took our statement, reviewed the footage, and marked it as unauthorized entry and tampering. Laurel contacted her service providers, changed her passwords, updated her device security, and had her phone scanned. We replaced her laptop the same day, but the private investigator still reviewed the previous device to extract evidence before disposing of it. I sent a copy of the footage to my father. He didn't respond. My younger brother reached out 2 days later. He said he was sorry, that he didn't know things had gone this far. My older sister, however, sent a one-line message. "This is family. You're blowing it out of proportion." I didn't respond. That same week, something new happened. Laurel had a presentation scheduled at work, something she'd spent weeks preparing. When she walked into the meeting, she found out her slides had already been emailed to one of the directors. The sender? An anonymous address using a temporary email domain. Her company flagged it immediately and opened an internal investigation. Only 3 people outside her office had ever seen that file. Me, my mother, and my father. The slides were stored in a shared folder we'd used briefly during wedding planning, which I'd never thought to deactivate. With the help of her company's IT team, we traced the IP address used to access and send the files. It was registered to my mother's home internet. I forwarded everything to our lawyer. This wasn't just personal anymore, it was targeted, professional sabotage. I called my father and told him if one more thing came from their side, there would be no warnings next time. Laurel and I switched to new phones. New numbers. Every digital account, from banking to cloud storage, was updated. Security questions, two-factor authentication, code words, everything was wiped and rebuilt. We shut down the shared wedding folder permanently. We started treating our home life like a locked vault. Then the letters arrived. 3 of them, spaced 2 days apart. No return address. Each one included a passage from religious texts circled in red. Each one came with an old photo of Laurel from her college days. Some from events she barely remembered. None of the photos were public. One had been taken at her cousin's wedding, another during a beach trip with friends, and the last at a volunteer event she once helped organize. Each envelope was hand-addressed. Laurel recognized the handwriting immediately. It matched a birthday card she once received from my aunt, my mother's closest friend. The loops on the L's, the way the exclamation points had double dots, it was the same. I checked the metadata on the email headers from the work breach again. One of the linked backup addresses for the burner email had a recovery number. We plugged it into a reverse search tool. The number came back linked to an old landline, registered to my aunt's house. It all clicked at once. This wasn't just my mother acting alone. She had help from people who thought they were protecting family values or whatever twisted version of control they believed in. My aunt, my sister, maybe even my father. This had never been about Laurel doing anything wrong. It was about them not being able to let go of who they expected me to become. That night, I walked Laurel through every step we'd taken so far. I laid out the camera footage, the police report, the IP address data, the envelopes, and the photos. We sat at the dining table and sorted everything into folders, digital and printed. Laurel didn't speak until I zipped the last binder shut. Then I told her, "This ends now. We're done reacting. We're done hoping they stop. We're done giving warnings. We're going to pull this thing apart, piece by piece. And when we're done, they'll never be able to twist a single part of our lives again." Laurel's father and uncle came over one evening after work. They didn't ask many questions. Laurel and I laid everything out, printouts of the IP logs, surveillance screenshots, the letters, the copied files from her work presentation, and the footage of my mother entering the house with a spare key. Both men had long careers in law enforcement. They reviewed the timeline and said, bluntly, that we were dealing with more than just family drama. Laurel's uncle made a call that night and connected us to a private investigator he trusted, a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and methodical. She came by the next morning, we handed over every piece of evidence we had, and she started building a case from the ground up. Within a week, she returned with more than we expected. She had uncovered a private Facebook group, invite only, hidden from public searches, administered by my aunt but used by several relatives. The group name sounded harmless, like something about family support, but inside were dozens of posts mocking Laurel. Screenshots of her job's public bio, her wedding photos, even cropped images from her college days were posted with sarcastic captions. There were 5 active members, my aunt, my mother, 2 women I barely knew but recognized from past family events, and 1 person using a fake profile we later traced back to my older sister. They had posted lies, that Laurel faked her resume, that she was isolating me from my family as part of some controlling strategy. One thread accused her of replacing my mother in my life and warned others to watch for signs of manipulation. I saved every screenshot and printed the worst of them. I didn't respond. I didn't tip them off. I sent the files directly to our lawyer, who started preparing a formal harassment complaint in case we needed it. A few days later, Laurel was called into a meeting with human resources at her job. An anonymous letter had arrived in the company's general inbox. The letter claimed Laurel had lied about her academic history and that she was being investigated for workplace fraud. The entire thing was fabricated. HR reviewed her documents, confirmed her credentials, and flagged the letter as an attempted character attack. They placed notes in her internal file and marked her profile for special handling. Any future messages, calls, or inquiries about her would go through a corporate security review. Her manager offered to let her work remotely for the time being. Laurel declined but appreciated the option. That same week, one of her coworkers sent her an audio file from a community gathering. Someone had left a phone recording during a women's church session. In the background, you could hear my mother's voice. She wasn't naming names directly, but she talked about spiritual dangers of letting outsiders poison the family structure and how some people pretend to be calm but bring chaos wherever they go. It was clearly about Laurel. She even referenced that wedding full of strangers. Then my younger brother sent me something unexpected, a voice recording from earlier that month. He'd been at a family barbecue when our mother was caught whispering instructions to our older sister. She told her to always be one step ahead, to offer help only when it puts Laurel off balance, and to remind Calvin who raised him whenever possible. That was the last straw. I compiled everything, the audio files, the screenshots, the Facebook group posts, the workplace letter, the envelope handwriting. I sent it all to our lawyer. Then I sent a final message to the family group chat. I made it clear there would be no more visits, no more calls, no more emails. Any contact from that point forward, direct or indirect, would be handled through legal representation only. That same day, my aunt sent out a message to extended family. She claimed Laurel was dangerous, that she was brainwashing me, and that we were trying to tear the family apart. She even said Laurel had set her sights on me for years and that she had proof of manipulation. The message went to cousins, distant relatives, family friends. People I hadn't spoken to in a decade were suddenly liking posts on social media that painted us as villains. I forwarded the message to our lawyer without comment. We didn't respond to anyone. That night, Laurel sat across from me at the kitchen table. She didn't look upset. She looked ready. She said if we were going to shut this down, we couldn't just file paperwork and wait. We needed to put everything on the table, once, publicly, and make sure there was no room left for twisting the story. She suggested one final confrontation. Not at our home, not over text. A place where they couldn't lie, couldn't rewrite, and couldn't pretend they didn't know what they were doing. I agreed. It was time to stop playing defense. I booked a private dining room at a quiet restaurant outside the city. No announcements, no big invites, just a message sent to my immediate family with a firm request for attendance. Alongside Laurel and me, I arranged for 2 neutral observers to be present. They were friends of mine from college, both in legal administration. They came solely to witness and document the meeting in case anything got twisted afterward. Laurel walked in with a briefcase and handed out folders to each person at the table. The folders contained printed evidence, screenshots, timestamps, audio transcripts, envelope scans, surveillance images. Each piece was labeled, ordered by date, and tabbed. I made it clear from the start, this wasn't a family dinner, this was a legal warning. We were not interested in emotional speeches, apologies, or excuses. What had been happening was coordinated, documented, and actionable. If it continued, we would pursue restraining orders and civil action. That was the only reason they were all in the room. Laurel spoke second. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't waver. She began with the footage of my mother entering our house uninvited and replacing her skincare. She followed with screenshots from the private Facebook group run by my aunt. Then came the forged email to her workplace, the anonymous religious letters, the digital breach traced back to my mother's IP address, and the audio recordings from the church gathering and the barbecue. When she laid out the photos of my mother walking into our home with a spare key, the room went completely silent. My mother put her head in her hands and cried. She claimed she hadn't meant harm, only to assess Laurel's intentions, but admitted her actions had gone too far. My father looked away. When asked directly, he admitted he had known about the Facebook group and the letter to Laurel's workplace. He claimed he didn't participate, but admitted he hadn't stopped it either. He shrugged, said it had gotten out of hand, and that he didn't think it would go this far. Laurel closed her folder, looked directly at the table, and stated clearly that she was finished engaging with this family. She said no one from that table was welcome in her life, her home, or her future. She didn't flinch when my mother cried harder. She didn't speak again. I stood beside her and backed her completely. I told them if any of them contacted us, showed up at our door, sent messages, or used third parties to get to us, our lawyer would file immediately. We weren't going to tolerate any more gray areas. My sister spoke up for the first time. She accused Laurel of creating drama, of tearing the family apart over online nonsense. One of the neutral witnesses stepped in and said Laurel had shown more composure and restraint than anyone they'd seen in similar cases, and that every piece of evidence held legal weight. No one said much after that. The dinner ended quietly. No hugs, no handshakes. My mother didn't look up. My aunt and sister left first, whispering on the way out. My father walked out without saying a word. No one defended my mother out loud. No one apologized. The next morning, a screenshot started circulating in one of the extended family group chats. My aunt had written a long message accusing Laurel of destroying the family to gain control of me. She claimed Laurel had staged some of the evidence, manipulated the dinner to look like a setup, and warned everyone that we were collecting dirt for lawsuits. I forwarded the message to our lawyer. He added it to the active case file. To de-escalate before formal filings, he issued cease and desist letters to my mother, my aunt, and my sister. Each letter cited digital harassment, defamation, and trespassing. Each was sent through registered courier, requiring proof of receipt. Laurel and I packed a weekend bag and left the city. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. We shut off our phones and left them behind. For 3 days, we stayed in a quiet cabin on a private property owned by a family friend. No Wi-Fi, no cameras, no contact. While we were gone, our lawyer began drafting the paperwork for restraining orders. The groundwork had been done. Now it was time to press forward with everything. Every file, every screenshot, every slip-up they'd left behind, it was going to count. When we returned from the cabin, there were 6 flyers slid under our door and taped to the mailbox. Each one had a collage of cropped screenshots, comments Laurel had made online, clipped messages from group chats, fragments of text from emails. The parts shown were twisted, made to seem like she was scheming, angry, or unbalanced. Her full name, workplace, and even the name of her supervisor were printed at the bottom of each flyer. One page had a message claiming Laurel had isolated me from my family to take control of my estate. Another suggested she had mental health issues, based on a sentence she'd once written in a private message to an old friend. The friend hadn't spoken to us in years. Laurel stared at one of the pages and pointed to a line from a text that had only ever existed on her personal phone, never backed up, never shared. That's when I took my laptop and went straight to my older sister's husband. I didn't give a long explanation. I just asked if he had ever installed anything on it. After a pause, he admitted that he had. My mother had paid him, he said. She told him she wanted to keep an eye on things after we moved in together. He installed tracking software during a family dinner when I left my bag in their den. I handed over my laptop to the private investigator. She did a full scan and confirmed it had been accessed remotely multiple times, always from the same IP address tied to my parents' house. She also found signs of similar spyware pinging Laurel's phone intermittently from an external server, though the intrusion on her device had failed halfway through. Our lawyer filed an official police report that afternoon: digital stalking, electronic intrusion, and harassment under both our names. He attached the full evidence packet, including technical breakdowns from the investigator. He also requested digital forensics preservation orders in case any devices belonging to the family were wiped after the complaint. The cease and desist letters, already prepared, were sent that evening to my mother, my aunt, and my sister. Each one included a timeline of offenses, referenced the police case number, and warned of imminent legal consequences for any further contact. 2 days later, our door camera picked up my mother arriving in the early morning. She wore sunglasses and a hoodie. She placed a woven basket on our doorstep and left quickly. Inside the basket were cookies, a candle, and a card. The card said, "We all make mistakes. You'll come around. Love always." We saved the footage and handed it to our lawyer. He attached it to the restraining order paperwork and marked it as a direct violation of the no contact notice. That same evening, my cousin sent a quiet warning through a third party. According to him, the family had decided to try going through Laurel's employer again. But this time, by using someone from outside the family, they had apparently reached out to a woman who used to attend the same church Laurel's family belonged to years ago. We contacted Laurel's workplace immediately. Their HR department escalated the issue to their legal team, and within 24 hours her office phone was replaced. Her desk location was shifted to a different floor, and a note was placed in her personnel file preventing outside contact without legal verification. Back at home, we began replacing every single electronic device that had ever been gifted by a family member: a kitchen tablet, a digital photo frame, even a power bank my sister once handed Laurel at a wedding. We went room by room, unplugging, discarding, and replacing. Our internet router was swapped, our network wiped and rebuilt, and our home Wi-Fi secured under new protocols. Then Laurel received an email from what appeared to be her old university's alumni department, asking her to confirm details about her academic record for an upcoming publication. Something felt off. The formatting was clunky, and the name of the person who signed it didn't match any official faculty list. We forwarded it to her school's IT department, who confirmed the domain had been spoofed. The IP address traced back to a family friend of my aunt who worked in a volunteer alumni group 10 years ago. I gave that information to our lawyer, who added it to the harassment file under conspiracy and identity fraud attempt. At this point, the case was no longer a question of if there would be legal consequences. It was about when my father, who had been silent for weeks, attempted to contact us, but the call was blocked automatically due to our universal number block settings. The call went straight to voicemail. I had already blocked every number associated with that side of the family. That included numbers I suspected they might use through friends or coworkers. Finally, I posted a notice outside the gate of our previous home before relocating. It was laminated and mounted at eye level. It read, "Notice, no entry permitted. Any individual listed in the active no contact orders will be prosecuted for trespassing. This property is under 24/7 monitored surveillance." That was the last time we heard from them in person. But we knew the legal part was just beginning. Our lawyer filed the harassment and cyberstalking complaint the following Monday morning. It wasn't just our documents this time. It included statements from neighbors who had seen suspicious activity, coworkers who'd received strange messages about Laurel, and the full technical report from the private investigator. The file was thick. Everything was time-stamped, verified, and cross-referenced. 3 days later, my mother was served the court summons at her workplace. The documents were delivered directly to her by a process server. There were witnesses. The office receptionist confirmed she opened it, looked at it, and walked straight into her manager's office. That marked the first formal move in a legal direction, and it was official now. She could no longer pretend it was just family tension. Almost immediately, my aunt started damage control. She posted a vague status online about fake stories tearing families apart. Then she messaged extended relatives, claiming Laurel was manipulating everything to isolate me and fabricate abuse for legal attention. We didn't respond. We had stopped explaining things a long time ago. 2 days later, Laurel's former therapist contacted her with an alert. A woman had called the clinic pretending to be a researcher, requesting notes on Laurel for a wellness project. She used Laurel's maiden name and got flustered when asked for credentials. The call was flagged, recorded, and reported to the local authorities for violating patient privacy protocols. The voice, according to the receptionist, sounded eerily familiar. That same day, my cousin reached out. This time not with warnings, but with actual involvement. He had overheard his mother, my aunt, pretending to be Laurel on the phone with the property management company overseeing our lease. She asked for access to our file, claimed there were domestic concerns, and tried to schedule an in-person meeting to discuss tenancy risk. The receptionist grew suspicious when she couldn't answer basic verification questions. They contacted us after the call, confused but concerned. At the end of that week, we heard from our wedding photographer. Someone using Laurel's full name had called the studio, requesting a reprint of the entire photo package and raw footage for a surprise anniversary project. They had our wedding date correct, along with the name of the venue, but the email address they provided bounced back. The photographer asked if we had changed our request. We hadn't. We asked for the call log and IP records from the online form. The phone number used to schedule the inquiry had been flagged previously in our case notes. We pulled up our email history and found 3 unauthorized login attempts on our shared archive account. two of which occurred weeks before the wedding. The password reset attempts had originated from a desktop in a suburb where my aunt's close friend lived. Our lawyer added all of it to the existing complaint and amended the filing to include identity theft and long-term digital harassment. The narrative wasn't just about physical stalking or family disagreements anymore. It had crossed into digital impersonation and premeditated sabotage. I spent the next day contacting every financial institution connected to us. Banks, credit card companies, insurance firms, investment accounts. I initiated fraud protection protocols and set new code word verifications on all major accounts. I also requested to be alerted for any attempted access or identity requests going forward. That afternoon, Laurel received a flower delivery at our door. There was no sender listed. The card inside quoted a line my mother used to say to me in private growing up. Something obscure, something no one outside the family would know. It was chillingly specific. The florist was local. I drove there myself and asked to speak to the manager. The receipt had a fake name, but the phone number matched a contact linked to my aunt's social group. Our legal team sent a subpoena to the shop, asking for footage. The surveillance video confirmed it. My aunt had placed the order in person, wearing sunglasses and paying in cash. It was her. She didn't even try to hide it well. With all that evidence, our lawyer went before the judge and requested an emergency restraining order covering my mother, my aunt, my sister, and any known associate acting on their behalf. It was granted. The order blocked all forms of contact, physical, digital, or through intermediaries. Any violation would now carry criminal penalties. As a final layer of protection, I installed a new monitored intercom system at the front gate. It logs all voice entries and records every approach, day or night. The system backs up to an off-site server and sends alerts to both of our phones if anything suspicious is detected. With the court hearing approaching, we now had everything we needed: physical proof, digital trails, witnesses, technical reports, financial sabotage attempts, emotional and reputational damage. It was all documented, organized, and secured. The case wasn't about what we claimed anymore. It was about what we could prove, and we could prove everything. 1 week before my company's annual leadership conference, I got a call from an old family friend I hadn't spoken to in a long time. She didn't ask for anything. She just told me, carefully, that my mother had been overheard telling someone she was planning to make a statement at the event. When pressed, she mentioned wanting to expose what Laurel had done in front of my colleagues. The friend said she didn't want to get involved, but she felt I needed to know before it was too late. I informed the conference organizers immediately. I forwarded them the restraining order and a formal letter from our attorney, detailing past incidents and warning that a known individual was attempting to cause disruption. The venue agreed to provide private security at each entrance, and made arrangements to escort out any uninvited guests on site. On the day of the conference, security was tight from the start. Laurel stayed home. I arrived through the staff entrance and stayed out of the lobby during registration. Still, it wasn't enough. Less than an hour into the welcome session, my mother showed up at the main door. She wasn't alone. She had 2 people with her, both from her social circle, recording on their phones. She began yelling about Laurel, accusing her of fraud, emotional abuse, and controlling my career. Guests turned. A few staff members tried to de-escalate, but she refused to leave. She shouted that I was a prisoner in my marriage, that the court case was a lie, that the real truth would come out in time. Security arrived in under 2 minutes and escorted her outside. Multiple attendees filmed the scene. Some clips began circulating in internal company groups. I was pulled aside by my team lead, who told me HR had already been briefed and was treating the situation with full discretion. No action was taken against me, but it was now impossible to pretend this wasn't affecting my professional life. That evening, a former neighbor who still attends the same church as my mother sent over an audio recording. In it, my mother could be heard discussing her plan to crash the event. She described it as a spiritual act, something to make Laurel answer publicly for what she had done. The tone was clear. It wasn't about clarity or concern. It was revenge, planned in detail and fueled by resentment. Our lawyer submitted the recording to the court and filed it under stalking, reputational defamation, and intentional disruption of professional livelihood. It strengthened the request for a permanent restraining order and helped escalate the complaint to include emotional damages. Laurel's employer, having already been briefed about the previous impersonation attempts, offered a transfer. It was a secure remote work position, with flexible hours and no public visibility. We agreed. Within a week, we packed and temporarily relocated out of state. The move wasn't permanent, just long enough to step out of reach while the case moved forward. I made arrangements for all personal documents, IDs, and sensitive material still left at our previous home to be moved into a private storage unit. Access was restricted to Laurel and me, and the address wasn't shared with anyone. We shut down all mail forwarding, changed delivery locations, and scrubbed our address from every old login or database we could think of. While settling into our temporary place, I discovered something new. My sister had created a burner account on a popular family tree site. Using my last name and Laurel's maiden name, she had begun piecing together personal details, including relatives, locations, and old photo tags. The site's admin team, when contacted, provided IP logs and access timestamps. The activity traced back to my sister's internet plan. I reported it to our attorney. Around the same time, my cousin, now fully cooperative, sent over a series of screenshots. They came from a private group chat between my mother, aunt, and sister. In the screenshots, they joked about sabotaging the wedding, discussing ways to keep Laurel humble, and betting on when I'd come to my senses. One message included a photo of a white dress, captioned, "Still thinking about wearing this, what's she gonna do? Kick me out." Our lawyer added the entire batch to our case under a new complaint: conspiracy to harass and coordinated emotional targeting. This was no longer just about individual actions. It was a campaign, one that had started before we were even married. Once settled into the new place, we began attending small community events. Local markets, book club nights, and weekend festivals, things that had nothing to do with who we had been before. We didn't mention the court case. No one knew about the restraining orders. For the first time in months, we could go somewhere without watching for shadows. Last week, our attorney called to confirm the court had accepted all charges into the final hearing. The judge approved a full review of our submitted evidence. The hearing was officially scheduled for the following month. With every form of contact severed, all digital vulnerabilities closed, and documentation finalized, we were closer than ever to the finish line. Not just legally, but emotionally. Closure was in sight. The courthouse was quiet when we walked in. Our lawyer met us at the door and handed Laurel the binder we had spent months building, evidence sorted by category. Tabs marked in red for digital violations, blue for physical incidents, and green for witness-backed documentation. Laurel handed it to the clerk once seated. The judge flipped through it slowly. Page after page of screenshots, metadata logs, access records, security footage, and signed witness statements. In the witness row, 6 people sat ready to speak. Our private investigator, 2 of Laurel's co-workers, a neighbor who had captured footage on their home security system, and 2 IT professionals who had helped trace spyware and digital intrusion back to my family's devices. Each of them had already submitted sworn declarations. All that remained was formal confirmation. My mother tried to interrupt when the surveillance footage of her entering our home with a key was shown. She stood up and said it had been misrepresented, that Laurel was twisting things for legal attention. The judge stopped her with one hand in the air and warned her not to speak unless addressed. She sat down without another word. My aunt and sister were also present. When asked directly about the burner accounts, the false property manager call, and the unauthorized access to the family tree site, both declined to answer. Not once did they deny involvement. They sat still, hands folded, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. After reviewing the binder and hearing from the witnesses, the judge granted a 5-year restraining order against my mother, aunt, and sister. The order covered physical contact, digital communication, and any third-party attempts to reach us on their behalf. It was comprehensive, no loopholes, no backdoors. Laurel was also granted formal workplace protection under a new clause, with digital security upgrades funded through her employer's legal department. It meant anyone attempting to contact her office, use her identity, or impersonate her in a professional setting would be flagged and immediately investigated. Our lawyer recommended a civil suit for damages. We had more than enough for it: emotional distress, workplace interference, defamation, and financial losses tied to relocation and lost work hours. But we chose to hold off unless the orders were violated. We agreed that unless they broke the new orders, we wouldn't pursue more. We didn't celebrate. No victory dinner, no social posts, no calls to extended family. We went home, locked the binder away, and sat in the living room without turning on the television. It wasn't a win to cheer about. It was a boundary that had finally been respected by force. The next day, we invited our new neighbors over for a small dinner. No one knew the full story. We didn't explain. We served food, lit a few candles, and played soft music. For the first time in a long while, there were no questions, no tension, no watching the door. I scheduled an appointment with our estate planner the following week. I removed every family member involved in the harassment from any legal designation: no medical authority, no financial access, no inheritance claims. Everything I owned would go to Laurel. No exceptions. Laurel did the same. We worked with the planner to create a joint living trust. It was simple, clear, and legally binding. We chose sole survivor rights for one another. No one else would have a say in what we built or what we left behind. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my uncle, the one who had stayed silent through it all. He wrote 2 pages. Most of it was an apology and acknowledgement of enabling behavior through silence. He said he had seen things but didn't know how to speak up, that he had kept quiet to avoid choosing sides, that he regretted staying out of it when things turned cruel. I read the letter once, then I wrote back with a single sentence: silence helped no one. Laurel didn't frame the restraining order to display, but she did keep a copy in the drawer by the front door. Not as a trophy, not as a threat. Just a reminder that peace has to be protected, and protection has to be enforced. On Sunday morning, we walked out into the backyard. We planted a small tree behind the fence. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet spot near the corner, away from the shed. We added a tag to the base of the tree. The tag said, "We decide who grows here." That was the end of it. Not the beginning of a new war, not a dramatic finish. Just the close of something that should never have started. But once it did, we made sure it would never be allowed again. I'm a 36-year-old father of 2, married for 9 years to my wife Caroline. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside the city, the kind of place where everyone waves from their porch and lawnmowers hum every Saturday morning. I work as a civil engineer, mostly site inspections and infrastructure planning. It's not flashy, but it pays well and gives me a structured schedule. Caroline works from home as a freelance graphic designer. For most of our marriage, I've handled the majority of our financial responsibilities: mortgage, insurance, school fees, groceries, without complaint. Caroline's family never liked me. Her mother and older brother were polite in public, but cold when it was just us. Her brother is a surgeon. Her mother was a lawyer before retiring. From day one, I got the feeling I was considered beneath them. Blue collar, too average, too practical. They'd ask how work was going, and then immediately change the topic when I answered. At family dinners, they'd talk over me or correct how I interacted with the kids like I was just a babysitter. They didn't approve of. Things got worse after our second child was born. Her family became more open with their criticism. They didn't like that I kept routines, set dinner times, screen time rules, bedtime schedules. Caroline's mother once told me I was raising future robots. She said kids needed emotion and chaos, not structure. I was the one doing drop-offs, packing lunches, helping with homework, organizing doctor appointments. But to her, it was never enough, never done the right way. One night, we were having dinner at Caroline's parents' place. I walked into the kitchen to get more water and saw Caroline, her mother, and her brother huddled by the sink, whispering. They stopped immediately when I stepped in. Caroline turned around and smiled too quickly. Her mother changed the subject. Her brother left the room. It didn't sit right with me, but I chalked it up to family gossip and moved on. I wish I hadn't. Not long after, Caroline began spending more time at her mother's house. Sometimes she'd take the kids with her. Other times she'd say she was working late, even though her studio was in our basement. Her phone started living face down on counters. Her laptop got a new password. When I asked questions, she gave short answers or brushed it off. I didn't press too hard at first. I figured she was just overwhelmed. Then one afternoon, I was driving home on the highway when I tapped my brakes and nothing happened. I pumped them, panicked, and managed to swerve into a guardrail instead of the back of a semi. I walked away with a mild concussion and a bruised shoulder. The car was towed. Caroline and her mother arrived at the hospital together. They were too calm, too rehearsed. Her mother did most of the talking, asking about insurance and damage reports like it was just a fender bender. Caroline sat beside her, nodding at everything. The next day, the mechanic called. He'd done a full inspection. Brake fluid was gone, not leaking. Gone, completely drained. He said this wasn't a wear and tear issue. Someone had done it deliberately. I brought it up to Caroline that evening, and she told me I was being paranoid. She said the mechanic must have made a mistake and that I should rest. She mentioned stress, how fatherhood can wear people down, that it might just be burnout making me suspicious. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way her mother started dropping hints in conversations. Questions like, "Do you think you're handling everything okay? Or would you consider seeing someone, just to talk?" These comments weren't coming from concern. They were part of something more calculated. I remembered a conversation we'd had weeks before the crash. Caroline had mentioned meeting a family lawyer with her mother. When I asked why, she said it was about estate planning. A week later, my neighbor, an older guy who walks his dog around the block every morning, pulled me aside, quietly, like he didn't want to be overheard. He said he saw Caroline's brother around my car the weekend before the accident. Said he thought it was weird because the guy had popped the hood and looked around, then left quickly when someone came out of the house next door. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't explode. I went out and bought a full home security setup the next day. Cameras at every entrance. Alerts sent to my phone. I changed the alarm codes and started locking up like I lived in a fortress. Caroline noticed but didn't ask. I didn't offer any explanation. I needed proof, real, clear evidence. I had a feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't just about disapproval anymore. It felt like something was being built around me piece by piece. A version of me that didn't exist. A narrative I wasn't writing, but was clearly a part of. So I started watching, recording, logging every strange moment. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a broken marriage or in-laws meddling, something deeper was happening. And I wasn't going to wait until it was too late to fight back. I started logging everything. Every strange moment, every sentence that felt rehearsed, every unexpected visit. I kept a handwritten journal, backed it up with time-stamped notes on a secure app. I wrote down who said what, when they arrived, how they looked. I set up a backup camera in the garage that pointed toward the driveway and another in my home office. I installed motion detectors with cloud notifications. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was preparation. One afternoon, Caroline's brother stopped by while I was working from home. He said he wanted to check in, asked about the kids, made small talk. When he left, I noticed a slim black folder tucked halfway under my office chair. I didn't touch it immediately. I waited until the cameras uploaded and confirmed he had been in that room. Inside the folder were printed documents, notes about child psychologists, sample custody evaluation questions, and a checklist titled Custody Positioning Behavioral Markers. It had underlined bullet points about emotional withdrawal, paranoia, parental inconsistency, and need for third-party verification. The folder had no name on it. I took photos of every page and sent them to my lawyer. A week later, I told Caroline I had to travel for a last-minute work inspection out of town. I packed a suitcase, left the house, and circled back after sunset. I spent 2 nights parked across the street, watching from a neighbor's garage with permission. On the second night, around 10:30 p.m., Caroline's mother pulled into our driveway in her car. She didn't knock. She walked straight to the side of the house, reached behind the garden hose box, and pulled out a hidden spare key. I watched her enter through the laundry room door and leave 20 minutes later, holding something in her hand, papers. I reviewed the camera feed from my office later and saw her going through drawers. That night, I changed every single lock in the house. Front door, back door, garage door, windows with pins, everything. Caroline and I still had our usual keys, but no one else did. I didn't tell her. I didn't ask questions. I just did it. I also replaced the garage keypad code and disabled remote access. A few days later, 2 police officers came to the door for a wellness check. They said they had received an anonymous tip claiming I was hearing voices and not acting like myself. I invited them in calmly, offered them water, and showed them around. They asked simple questions. I answered plainly. They left after 15 minutes, saying everything looked normal. I asked if they could share who reported it. They said the call was untraceable, but was made from a prepaid line. Right after that, Caroline started using new language with the kids. Subtle things. She told our daughter that sometimes adults get sick in their minds and need rest. She asked our son if he would still feel safe if dad took some time to get better. These weren't bedtime talks. They were planted questions, like someone had rehearsed them. I booked an appointment for a full psychiatric evaluation. I sat through 3 sessions with a licensed professional, answered every question, took cognitive assessments, and passed every one. The final report stated that I had no diagnosable mental illness, showed no signs of instability, and presented as fully capable of safe parenting. I had it signed, notarized, and sent to my lawyer for documentation. Then something shifted in the neighborhood. People who used to wave suddenly looked down. A neighbor who had helped fix my shed last year now avoided eye contact. Caroline's mother had started dropping hints, things like he's been different lately, or the accident must have shaken something loose. Someone had been planting stories. An anonymous email was sent to my HR department. It claimed I was volatile and possibly dangerous to coworkers. HR called me in for a private meeting. I provided them with logs, a copy of the psychiatric report, and explained what was happening. They assured me there were no concerns and placed the email in an internal record with no action taken. One evening, Caroline suggested we take space. She wanted a trial separation. She said I was clearly stressed and maybe a break would help. She had already packed bags for the kids and planned to stay at her mother's house for a few weeks. I told her I wasn't leaving. I was in my own home, where I paid the bills, where the kids had their routines, their toys, their beds. I didn't raise my voice. I just made it clear. I wasn't the one staging anything. The next morning, I met with a family lawyer a colleague had recommended. I brought the folder, the footage of Caroline's mother entering the house, the police visit record, the psychiatric report, and the screenshots of Caroline's recent messages about needing time apart. He listened, flipped through the papers, and said one sentence that snapped everything into place. They're trying to create a custody narrative. They want you to look unstable. That night, I shut every door behind me. I deleted shared calendars. I changed all passwords. I removed access to online photo albums, school portals, shopping accounts, anything Caroline's family could see or use. I sent a formal email to Caroline stating that all future parenting discussions needed to go through legal channels. I backed up everything twice. From that point forward, I stopped reacting. I started documenting. They wanted me to break down. Instead, I was building the case, piece by piece. Before the next custody handoff, I placed 2 discrete audio and video recorders in the house, one in the foyer, where exchanges usually happened, and one in the living room, angled to capture conversations when they lingered inside. Both were synced to a private cloud folder, accessible only to me and my lawyer. I didn't mention them to anyone. 3 days later, during a late afternoon handoff, Caroline's mother walked in with Caroline. They acted like they were just chatting, but the FOIA recorder picked up a quiet sentence that changed everything. Caroline's mother said, "Just keep pushing him until he reacts. We need something to show a judge. No emotion, no hesitation." It was said like it was a strategy, not a concern. I clipped that audio, labeled it with the timestamp, and uploaded it to the secure folder. My lawyer was notified immediately. The next day, Caroline told me that our kids had said they were scared of me. I waited until she left, then asked them both in the most casual, calm tone possible if anything I did ever made them feel unsafe. They looked confused. My daughter asked if this was about the time I raised my voice when the milk spilled. My son said I was the boring parent. Neither mentioned fear. I wrote it all down and added it to my record. I offered to shift all future custody exchanges to a monitored center, neutral staff, cameras, reports. Caroline paused, but eventually agreed. Our first handoff at the facility was clean. The second one, not so much. Her mother showed up again. As I arrived, she stepped back and loudly told the staff I smelled like alcohol. I turned to the staff member, asked for a breathalyzer on the spot. The center had a small kit on hand. I passed immediately, 0.00, no trace of alcohol. The staff logged everything and filed a formal report. It included a note about the accusation being unsupported and potentially intended to provoke. I received a copy for my records, and my lawyer submitted it to the custody file. A few days later, HR called me in again. This time it was a voicemail forwarded from the office line. An anonymous caller claimed I'd been seen drinking out of a thermos on the job and slurring my words during a site visit. I had lunch receipts from that day, GPS logs from my work vehicle, and 2 team members who had ridden with me. I printed it all and handed it over. HR once again flagged the report as baseless. From that point on, I began building a traceable map of my entire day every day. My phone logged GPS routes automatically. I took pictures of every lunch receipt. I synced my calendar with work projects and timestamped every email I sent. I even installed a dash cam in my car, facing forward and backward, uploading footage to a cloud drive daily. A friend of Caroline's, someone who used to hang out with us when the kids were younger, reached out quietly. She said Caroline's family thought I was too methodical and were talking about trying to make me snap. Her exact words, "They think the only way to win now is to force a mistake." 1 week later, Caroline filed a custody modification request. Included in her documents were 2 letters supposedly written by a licensed counselor. The letters expressed concern about the father's mental health stability. They used vague language, nothing verifiable, but enough to look suspicious if you didn't dig deeper. My lawyer did. The counselor named in the letters had never met me. In fact, she had no record of me at all. The letters weren't even from her office. Her actual legal team responded to a verification request and confirmed that the signature had been copied from an online PDF form. We filed a motion to subpoena the source and flagged the documents as potentially fraudulent. A court date was assigned 2 weeks out. My lawyer called that evening and said, "Expect escalation. This won't stop now that they're in front of a judge." That same night, I added a new layer of tracking, small GPS tags under both cars, mine and Caroline's. They weren't for spying, they were for patterns. I wanted to know if I was being followed or monitored. 3 days later, the tracker on Caroline's mother's vehicle showed a partial overlap with mine, on the same road to my son's daycare, within 5 minutes of drop-off time. No other reason for her to be there. No event. No pickup. She had no authorization. I reached out to a legal aid I trusted, someone who worked inside the courthouse and had access to sealed filings. After some careful inquiry, she found a sealed affidavit filed by Caroline's lawyer 2 weeks earlier. It stated that I had suffered a psychotic break and posed a risk to the children. No evidence. No medical record, just a sworn statement, buried under the claim of urgency. I didn't confront Caroline. I didn't text, call, or respond. Everything from that point forward went through lawyers. My custody agreement was still valid, but now I had to prove that I wasn't just defending myself. I was unraveling something bigger. And I was doing it with facts, not outbursts. Every single piece they planted was being pulled apart, and the cracks were finally showing. 3 days before the custody hearing, my lawyer received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside were printed photos, 6 of them, taken through a window. I was sitting in a booth at a bar restaurant near the highway, with my brother and a few cousins. The pictures were timed around 8 p.m. They showed me raising a glass, laughing, holding what looked like a drink. The implication was clear. I'd been drinking in public, maybe even getting drunk while custody talks were ongoing. But I hadn't had a drop. It was a family dinner after a wake, and I'd had soda the entire night. I pulled out the receipt from that evening. It listed every item ordered, 3 sodas in my name. I had a credit card charge to match the timestamp. My cousin had sent me a group message that night, with photos from dinner, showing the full context. You could see the table, the drinks, even the soda cans in front of me. My lawyer compiled it all and added it to our evidence file, side by side with the envelope. Whoever had taken those pictures had done so selectively, only from the angles that would suggest something else. 4 days later, Caroline's family filed a motion for an emergency custody hearing. Their claim, that I posed an immediate threat to the children's safety. No real incident, just a collection of vague statements, including the bar photos and a line about my increasingly erratic behavior. My lawyer responded within 24 hours with security footage from my front door camera, recorded 2 weeks earlier, showing Caroline's mother tampering with a sealed envelope on my porch. She had approached in the afternoon, looked around, flipped open my mailbox, pulled out a few envelopes, snapped photos of one, then slid it back in. It wasn't the same day as the photos, but it established a pattern. The judge denied the emergency motion but said that the custody case had reached a level where both parents would now be required to undergo court-ordered psychological evaluations before further decisions could be made. I booked mine immediately, went through the process within the week. It was longer and more detailed than the previous one. I had voluntarily done neurocognitive tests, stress response reviews, consistency scales. I passed again, no clinical flags. The final report stated I was mentally stable, fit to parent, and showed remarkable resilience under pressure. Caroline's evaluation, by contrast, didn't go smoothly. She missed the first appointment and showed up late to the rescheduled one. According to court records, she refused to answer several direct questions and challenged the therapist's authority repeatedly. Her report came back as inconclusive, with notes that she was non-cooperative and exhibited defensive patterns inconsistent with full transparency. That same week, one of my coworkers texted me a photo. It was Caroline's brother standing across the street from our building's employee parking lot. It wasn't the first time. He had done it a month prior, also around closing time. My lawyer used the time-stamped image, combined with prior footage of him hovering near my car, to file for a workplace protective order. He cited repeat harassment and attempted intimidation. Then it got worse. One morning at daycare drop-off, the director pulled me aside. Caroline's mother had shown up 15 minutes before I arrived, claiming she was there to collect the kids. She wasn't on any authorized list. The staff refused her, but she stood outside and argued for several minutes before leaving. The incident was logged and added to the file. I filed a motion the next day to restrict Caroline's family from all school or daycare access. No pickups, no contact. The judge granted temporary restrictions pending a full hearing. That same week, a child therapist appointed by the court met with both my children. Their report was detailed and mostly positive. They found the kids to be calm, well-adjusted, and comfortable in their home environment. But the therapist noted that both children had used phrases that sounded coached. Terms like "daddy sometimes forgets things," and "maybe he's not ready to be alone with us," which matched the earlier claims Caroline had made. When this report was submitted, Caroline's lawyer accused me of illegal surveillance in front of the judge, trying to get my audio recordings thrown out. My lawyer responded immediately with jurisdictional law, one-party consent state. All footage and audio from inside the home was legal, owned by me, and directly relevant to the custody case. While preparing the follow-up materials, a tech-savvy friend of mine helped scan my cloud activity logs. We found a login attempt from an encrypted IP range. After a few hops through regional markers, it led back to a consistent IP associated with Caroline's mother's neighborhood. The pattern matched previous logins made to her online photo album account. She had reused a masked browsing tool but slipped once. We added it all to the file. That same week, the judge issued a temporary protective order. Caroline's family was barred from all direct contact with me. All custody exchanges were now to take place under supervision at the monitored facility. No exceptions. Caroline's brother and mother were forbidden from being present. Caroline was warned in court that any further manipulation could affect the final custody judgment. From that point on, every move they made added to the pile. But now, they weren't controlling the story. I was. With proof, with law, with facts they couldn't twist. And the court was finally listening. A week before the next hearing, my lawyer received a manila envelope addressed to the judge. Inside was a typed letter signed by a concerned neighbor. It accused me of being aggressive, unstable, and volatile in public. The language was formal but clumsy, filled with the same phrases I'd heard repeated for months: erratic behavior, paranoid tendencies, emotional withdrawal. The formatting looked familiar, and the envelope was postmarked from a local box. My lawyer asked if I had anything to compare the handwriting to. I dug through an old filing cabinet and found 2 birthday cards Caroline's mother had written to our kids years ago. The loops, slants, and spacing were identical. We submitted both samples to the court, along with an affidavit confirming the match. This, combined with the mounting interference, led to the case being reassigned to a senior judge who specialized in high-conflict custody disputes. The reassignment itself triggered a chain reaction. Prior filings were re-reviewed, and earlier motions flagged as potentially malicious were re-examined under stricter scrutiny. Shortly after that, Caroline requested court-ordered mediation. She claimed she wanted to avoid unnecessary escalation. The session took place at a neutral center, with a licensed mediator present. Caroline spent most of the time bringing up vague incidents: how I had cold spells, how I could become unresponsive, how she was worried the kids were absorbing tension. I stayed quiet, stuck to logistics, refused to engage in anything that sounded like bait. The mediator ended the session early, called it unproductive, and filed a report stating that Caroline appeared to be trying to steer the session toward emotional framing instead of problem solving. That same week, a nanny we had once hired years ago called me out of the blue. She said someone from Caroline's family had offered her money to write a statement claiming I used to yell at the kids. She refused. Instead, she forwarded a voicemail left by Caroline's brother, asking her to just give a short written note confirming the household wasn't emotionally stable. My lawyer filed it into court evidence with the audio and confirmed the caller's identity. 2 days later, Caroline claimed in court that I had drained our shared savings account to prevent her from accessing funds. The court requested full financial disclosures. My lawyer presented bank records showing Caroline had transferred $27,000 into a private account under her name. The routing number linked to her mother's address. We also found 2 payments labeled as legal consult, not associated with her current lawyer. I filed an immediate motion to freeze all joint assets. The court approved the freeze and issued an injunction that flagged any unusual withdrawals from shared accounts for review. The following Friday, a neighbor came by with dashcam footage. It showed Caroline's brother crouched under my car in the driveway at night. When the neighbor's porch light turned on, he stood up, walked away quickly, and drove off. His face was clear, as was his license plate. We didn't know what he had done under the car, but that didn't matter. Trespassing and suspicious behavior around a vehicle already tampered with was enough. My lawyer submitted the footage to both the police and the court, where it was added to the restraining order record. 3 days later, Caroline's attorney formally withdrew from the case. No explanation was filed, just a signed release. The court approved the substitution of counsel, and Caroline was given time to find new representation. Her delay triggered a short pause in active hearings, but all protective orders and custody conditions remained in place during the transition. Caroline used the gap to tell the court that I was isolating the kids from her. She submitted that they had started refusing to visit her, and that I was poisoning their perception. I submitted weekly visitation logs from the monitored exchange center, which included staff notes and timestamps. The logs showed that the children had been compliant and calm, but had requested to stay longer at my home multiple times. This was documented by the staff, not me. The judge, reviewing all prior manipulations, ordered a fresh psychological evaluation, not for the parents this time, but for the children. A neutral therapist was appointed by the court with full authority to interview the children at school and at the visitation center. The judge noted the high probability of one-sided narrative coaching and requested an expedited timeline. At that point, I stopped reacting to individual accusations. Everything Caroline's family tried was either caught on camera, exposed by witnesses, or directly contradicted by official logs. The damage they'd done to their own credibility was stacking up faster than any lie they could plant. And the court wasn't just watching now, it was documenting. The court-appointed child therapist submitted her report 2 weeks after the last session. She'd met with the children individually, both at the exchange facility and briefly during a home observation visit. Her notes confirmed that both children appeared emotionally stable, relaxed in their routines, and showed no signs of distress or coached behavior. She specifically mentioned their confidence in household structure and their attachment to both parents, though she added that the children showed some discomfort when asked about visits with Caroline's mother. Around that same time, a store manager from a small grocery store near the exchange facility reached out. He said one of his cashiers had flagged something strange on their exterior security camera. The footage showed Caroline's mother grabbing my daughter's arm roughly in the parking lot. My daughter had pulled away from her and stopped walking. Caroline's mother yanked her forward by the wrist and shouted at her. A bystander began to approach before Caroline's mother released her and hurried inside the car. The store gave the footage voluntarily. We submitted it to the court with a written witness statement. 3 days later, Child Protective Services showed up at my house unannounced. Someone had filed a report claiming I was hoarding garbage, screaming throughout the day, and locking the kids in their rooms for hours. The visit lasted over an hour. The inspector toured every room, spoke to the children, inspected the fridge, the beds, the backyard gate locks. At the end, she said there was no concern and closed the visit. The report was marked as retaliatory and included in the custody file. At that point, my lawyer recommended hiring a private investigator. I agreed. Within 3 weeks, the investigator found something serious. Caroline's family had been in contact with a private custody consultant nearly 6 months before the brake failure incident. Phone logs from a burner phone showed dozens of calls between Caroline, her mother, and the strategist. The timeline lined up exactly with when Caroline began pulling away and when her family started testing boundaries with the kids. The same investigator uncovered that Caroline's brother had been named in a prior civil complaint in another state. The allegations were disturbingly similar. Accusations of rumor spreading, unauthorized surveillance, and providing altered evidence during a custody case involving a coworker. That complaint had been settled privately but still existed in court archives. We requested a certified copy and added it to our growing submission list. Around that time, Caroline tried another tactic. She printed out screenshots of old text arguments from early in our marriage and filed them as evidence that I was controlling. The messages looked harsh, until we compared them to the originals. She had clipped individual sentences, reordered them, and cropped the timestamps. In one case, she had removed a line where I apologized for raising my tone and where she had admitted fault. I released the full threads in court, all backed up by digital metadata. My lawyer called in a certified digital forensics analyst. The expert reviewed both versions, the ones submitted by Caroline and the ones we had archived. He confirmed several signs of digital tampering, blurred timestamp edges, inconsistent compression ratios, and evidence of copy-pasting conversation segments. He testified in court that the evidence Caroline had submitted had been manipulated, and that her submission could not be considered reliable. That hearing was short. The judge didn't just reject her evidence, he made a formal note of possible contempt. The court warned Caroline that further submission of falsified material could result in penalties and would be weighed in the final custody decision. Then, another envelope surfaced, this one intercepted by courthouse mail staff. It was handwritten, unsigned, and addressed directly to the judge. The letter accused me again of being emotionally abusive, but it used phrases nearly identical to the earlier fake neighbor letter. The writing matched Caroline's mother's birthday card samples again. As a result, the court issued a ban on Caroline's mother from attending any future hearings. Her presence was officially prohibited. With everything stacking up, child therapist findings, falsified evidence, suspicious family activity, the court issued a temporary custody shift. I was granted full temporary custody, with Caroline receiving limited supervised visits only. The visits would continue at the monitored facility, with a child welfare officer present for every session. Caroline's mother and brother were not permitted to attend or loiter near the building. In response, Caroline's family started spreading a rumor that I was brainwashing the kids. They told neighbors that I was turning the children against their mother. But no professional, no teacher, counselor, or therapist supported that claim. The report showed healthy communication and behavior patterns. The only time the children appeared nervous was during visits involving Caroline's mother. My lawyer started consolidating everything into one comprehensive brief for the final custody hearing. He titled the case outline Pattern of Manufactured Instability. His goal was clear, to permanently sever Caroline's family from any custodial influence. The judge had already warned them multiple times. One more violation, and criminal charges would be considered. At this point, the courtroom phase was no longer just about custody. It was about protecting the children from further interference, and it was nearly over. The custody trial was officially scheduled. Both legal teams were given 2 weeks to submit final evidence, witness lists, and expert reports. My lawyer and I spent that time organizing everything chronologically, documents, footage, recordings, psychological assessments, banking records, and third-party testimonies. Nothing was left unverified. Midweek, my lawyer received a forwarded audio file through a forensic analyst we'd previously used. It was metadata extracted from a cloud cache Caroline's brother had accidentally synced to a public folder months ago. The voice note was between him and Caroline's mother. The timestamp placed the conversation just hours before the brake failure incident. In it, her brother said, "It has to look accidental. If the timing's off, it's useless." Her response was, "Just make sure it doesn't trace." The judge admitted the voice note as circumstantial evidence, noting its relevance to both the ongoing custody case and the now open criminal inquiry tied to the tampering. Caroline's legal team filed a motion to suppress the mechanic's testimony from earlier in the year. They argued that his conclusions were speculative and not forensic grade. The court denied the motion. The mechanic appeared in person, confirmed under oath that the brake fluid had been deliberately drained, and explained that no natural wear or mechanical fault could have caused it. He had photos and a written report, both time-stamped and notarized. His testimony was marked as credible and added to the permanent case file. My employer, without being asked, submitted a sworn affidavit stating that in nearly 10 years of employment, I had never once received a complaint for erratic behavior, missed deadlines, or interpersonal issues. They included performance reviews from 3 department heads. The judge accepted the letter as a character reference. Caroline's mother was subpoenaed to testify regarding several topics, including her role in the brake incident and the letter previously intercepted and traced back to her. She took the stand, but after answering initial background questions, she invoked her right to remain silent when asked about the vehicle tampering and custody-related interference. Her refusal was recorded, and the judge noted that, combined with the voice note and past documented behavior, it cast severe credibility concerns over all of Caroline's family involvement. My lawyer presented our final evidence packet, time-stamped home security videos, cloud backup access logs, GPS tracking logs, digital copies of every journal entry, annotated child therapist reports, and the court-approved private investigator's timeline of Caroline's family's planning. It was organized with digital indexing for the court's use. Each piece was cross-referenced with external verification. Caroline took the stand next. The court questioned her on the inconsistencies between her personal claims and the findings from the children's therapist. She struggled to explain why her version of events, claims of instability and emotional neglect, did not match any professional evaluations. When shown the original versus manipulated screenshots she had submitted earlier in the case, she could not account for the differences. Her attorney quietly advised her to consider settlement options to avoid possible perjury or obstruction charges. My stance was clear: no shared custody unless her family was legally and physically barred from the children's lives. I was not willing to enter into any agreement that allowed her mother or brother to regain access through loopholes. The court's final appointed psychologists submitted their findings near the end of the trial phase. Their report was blunt. It confirmed clear patterns of emotional coaching, rehearsed language, and environmental manipulation during the children's visits to Caroline's residence. The psychologist noted elevated stress responses during those periods compared to time spent at my home or school. Based on the findings and the overwhelming volume of evidence, the judge issued a ruling before the final day. I was granted emergency protective custody of both children, with full legal decision-making authority. Caroline was allowed supervised visitation only, at the state-monitored facility. The judge warned her that if any member of her family interfered again, it would not only jeopardize her visitation rights, but could result in criminal prosecution for aiding and abetting interference. Just before the court adjourned for the week, the judge's clerk passed a note to my attorney. The district attorney's office had opened an active case file against Caroline's mother and brother. They were formally reviewing charges related to conspiracy, child endangerment, and tampering with a motor vehicle. We left the courtroom without any drama. There were no confrontations, no more false smiles, no last-minute scenes. Everything that needed to be shown was already in the record. Caroline sat silently at her table, her new attorney writing notes as the clerk stamped the protective custody documents. The children were already home, unaware of the details, but protected by the outcome. For the first time in nearly a year, the noise from Caroline's family stopped, not because they were sorry, but because finally, they were being watched by someone who could hold them accountable. And now, it wasn't just a custody case. It was a matter for the criminal courts. A formal criminal investigation was launched less than 2 weeks after the custody trial concluded. Detectives reopened the brake tampering incident under a new case category: coordinated endangerment. They pulled full forensics on the vehicle again, this time with state lab resources. Within days, they lifted clear fingerprints from the undercarriage components, right near the brake fluid reservoir. The prints matched Caroline's brother. When he was brought in for questioning, he refused to give an explanation and immediately requested legal counsel. He was released pending further review, but the charges were already being drafted. The investigation widened. Caroline's mother was tied to a storage unit on the far side of town, rented under a fake name with prepaid cards. The key was found during a search of her home. Inside the unit were multiple binders. One contained printed drafts of fake custody affidavits, some with forged signatures, others with blank witness lines. Another held photos of me, and the kids taken from various locations: the park, the school drop-off line, my job site. There were notes like "use this one if court delays," and "he looks angry here." Timestamp this. Based on everything recovered, formal charges were filed against both of them. Caroline's mother and brother were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, custodial interference, and attempted endangerment of minors. The district attorney's office held a press conference, confirming that the custody case had exposed a deeper pattern of malicious conduct, not just isolated incidents. Following the criminal charges, my lawyer submitted a motion for a full restraining order against Caroline's entire family. The court approved it immediately. They were barred from contacting me, the children, or appearing at any location we were scheduled to be: school, home, parks, stores. All digital communication and indirect outreach were covered under the order. Caroline, now legally separated from her family in court proceedings, agreed to settle. She signed a binding agreement that limited her to biweekly supervised visitation only. She waived all decision-making rights concerning the children, education, healthcare, travel, religion, and dropped all pending appeals regarding custody. The terms were permanent unless overturned by a higher court, which her new attorney did not attempt to pursue. Under a sealed order, I relocated the kids and myself to a quieter town 3 hours away. The judge sealed the relocation details to prevent Caroline's family from discovering the new location. We enrolled in a new school district. I met with the principal and the school counselor in person, disclosed only the minimum necessary for safety protocol, and asked for discretion. Both agreed. A child support staff member was assigned to monitor and report any unusual interactions discreetly. Caroline's visits now took place at a supervised visitation center, neutral location, monitored by a child welfare officer at all times. No private contact, no unsupervised speech. Each session was logged, observed, and recorded. The officer submitted weekly reports confirming compliance and behavior. Caroline never missed a session, but her demeanor had shifted completely. There were no attempts to bring gifts, no pressure to talk about the past, only short, quiet visits that ended right on time. Her brother was denied bail on the grounds of being a flight risk. His lawyer argued he had no prior record, but the court cited the use of prepaid burner phones, out-of-state storage units, and surveillance behavior as red flags. Caroline's mother was placed under house arrest while awaiting trial. A tracking device was installed, and she was forbidden from using internet-enabled devices or contacting any minor. One afternoon, I received a plain envelope postmarked from out of state. Inside was a single page, handwritten, with no name. It read, "You were never the enemy. I'm sorry for what they did. They got carried away. We all did." I didn't respond. I scanned it, filed it with the rest, and turned it over to my lawyer. At the next court review hearing, the presiding judge made a rare public statement for the record. He called Caroline's family's conduct a calculated campaign of psychological terrorism, masked as concern for children, and warned that the damage done to the kids' sense of safety would be evaluated again before any future visitation expansion could even be considered. I began the process to legally change my children's last names. The paperwork went through family court, and I was granted authority to amend school records, medical files, and future identification documents. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about creating clean documents that wouldn't tie them to court headlines forever. My lawyer also began drafting a civil suit, one to recover the cost of therapy, damages from legal expenses, and relocation costs. We calculated not just receipts but opportunity loss, the jobs I turned down, the hours I missed, the months of legal battles. The lawsuit targeted assets in Caroline's family trust, which had funded much of their legal behavior and coordinated planning. At home, everything stayed calm. We didn't talk about court. The kids focused on school, soccer, and art class. I made dinner, handled bedtime, and managed routines like always. The legal war wasn't over, but the fight was no longer inside our house, and that was enough for now. The criminal trial started in early spring. The courtroom was packed. I testified first, followed by the forensic mechanic who had inspected my car after the brake failure. He explained in clear terms how the brake line was intentionally drained and how it couldn't have been caused by wear or error. Then the digital forensics analyst took the stand. He broke down the audio file metadata, proving it came from Caroline's brother's cloud sync and had not been edited. He also confirmed IP logs tying Caroline's mother to unauthorized login attempts on my accounts. The final witness was the court-appointed child psychologist, who spoke to the lasting psychological impact of what the children experienced, not just through custody manipulation, but emotional exposure to calculated behavior. Caroline's mother tried to shift all responsibility to her son. She claimed she hadn't known anything about the brake tampering or the false reports. That defense didn't hold for long. The prosecution played her voice notes in court, the ones where she talked about timing the incident and making it look accidental. Her tone was unmistakable, calm, planned. She didn't speak again after that and remained silent for the rest of the proceedings. Caroline's brother was found guilty on all charges: tampering with a motor vehicle, endangering children, and interfering with custodial rights. Caroline's mother was convicted of conspiracy and perjury. Her sentencing was postponed briefly for a psychological evaluation after her attorney claimed mental instability. The state psychologist later cleared her as fully competent to stand sentencing. Parallel to that, the civil case was finalized. The court awarded damages totaling just over $200,000. This included therapy for the kids, lost wages, legal fees, relocation expenses, and pain and suffering. The judgment was to be paid out from jointly held assets belonging to Caroline's mother and brother. Their family trust was ordered liquidated by a civil court-appointed auditor. Caroline quietly relocated out of state. She didn't notify the court or the visitation center, which triggered a compliance review. It turned out she had moved without updating the monitoring facility, missing 2 visits in a row. After the second violation, the judge suspended her visitation indefinitely, pending full review. No appeals were filed. Her new attorney submitted no objections. The children started seeing a therapist weekly. The sessions were short, activity-based, and built around normal routines. They painted, played board games, and slowly began to talk about the past year. One night after dinner, my daughter asked me, "Why did Mom want people to think you were bad?" I told her, "Some people try to win by ruining others, but real strength is choosing to protect, not destroy." She nodded once, then went back to coloring. Later that month, I started writing under a pseudonym. I joined online communities for people going through family-based legal sabotage, quiet spaces where people could share without fear of judgment. My story, with names changed and locations removed, became a resource for others. Some reached out privately. A few local parents even asked to meet, and soon, a small support group formed in the community. The school staff stepped up. The kids' teachers added extra privacy protocols to their records. The counselor helped coordinate with the after-school program. The principal offered to act as a point of contact if anything unusual ever happened. A quiet net formed around the kids, invisible but firm. At the final custody review, the judge issued a permanent order. Full legal and physical custody was granted to me. All visitation rights, direct or indirect, for Caroline and her family were revoked until the children turned 18. The judge referenced the extensive court record, stating that continued involvement from Caroline's family would cause harm. The ruling was final. I updated every document, guardianship, will, school authorization forms, emergency contacts. Caroline's name was removed from everything. New copies were filed and notarized. The kids' records were sealed under protective status. Their names, schedules, even pediatrician assignments were updated to reflect our relocation. Nothing was left open. There would be no backdoor access. A month later, sentencing was delivered. Caroline's brother was given 7 years without parole. The judge cited his involvement in tampering with a moving vehicle that carried children. Caroline's mother was sentenced to 5 years, with the possibility of parole after 3. She was taken into custody immediately. 2 years passed without incident. During that time, we focused on routines. The kids did well in school. I worked remotely more often, got involved in local events, coached Little League. There were no court dates, no letters, no surveillance, just regular days. Finally, eventually I began dating again. I took it slow. I was honest about everything up front. I made it clear that I wasn't looking to rebuild a fantasy. I was a father first, and always would be, and that's it. The crash didn't break me. It exposed the truth. Everything that followed forced the lies to the surface, and from that, I built something that can't be taken apart. My children are safe. Their names are clean, their futures are theirs, and nobody will ever get a second chance to rewrite our story again.